It's great to be here. I want to thank CRT for having me back again. I think I've spoken with many of you. I know many of you in the audience, so it's great to see you again. I am afraid that this is, and Rick, I'm not including you in this, but this is a parade of nerds then, because I'm going to give the same presentation as Joe. And that's almost literally the case. But you shouldn't despair about that. You should actually be really glad, because it means that everybody is finding the same thing when they look into these issues. And what we did at Smart Growth America was this last year, we decided to look at all the different studies out there in the world that have been done by architects, CPA, academicians, fiscal economists, and others, and try to figure out what general conclusions can you draw from those. And we found some interesting things that I think are pretty consistent with what you just heard, and that's a good thing, because these relationships are, in fact, I think, very consistent. The first thing to know is that when it comes to development patterns, they do affect your budget. They affect about a third of your budget, typically, for a municipality or a county. Other things are less sensitive to how and where you grow, but they impact, in fact, a big chunk of that. And there are some basic takeaways, or there are some basic things that contribute to that influence, and it's things like road maintenance, it's providing fire and police services, it's costs of operations and maintenance, and the capital costs of putting in infrastructure. Those are some of the kinds of costs that come up. And development affects these costs. How you develop, as you just heard a really great discussion, and we heard a lot on the revenue side and the value side from Joe. I'm going to be talking first about the cost side. What are the implications from the cost side? And it's pretty simple. When you look across all the different studies that have been done around the country, you find a couple different things. From a cost perspective and a revenue perspective, compact is the better deal. It just comes out study after study. So if you want some sort of rules of thumb when thinking about these things, and if you don't want to quite have to do all the math, you can know, in general, compact is the better deal. Low-density suburban rarely pays for itself. It sometimes breaks even, but it's tough, and it's always relatively small and at the margin. And it makes a lot of sense wherever you can to reuse what you've already built. That just makes sense. Particularly if you've got excess capacity there, spare capacity, it's sort of free. So all of those are fiscally smart things to do. Here's the per acre cost for different locations and types of development, and you can see the fringe development where it's basically very low density and spread out into far-flung locations, ends up costing a lot to serve. And at suburban infill, basically making the areas that you've already built a little more compact is lower cost, and then urban infill actually is bringing the cost down even further. And when you start to actually match that up with some of the revenue side things, you get a powerful combination of really high value and less costly to serve. A couple of the areas that I just want to kind of illustrate some of the examples that we found in these different studies. And so you can think about police and fire departments and some of the interactions that they have with trying to cover different areas of service. This was in Charlotte, North Carolina, and this was a kind of tale of two different fire stations. And I think I've got well, I don't have a pointer here. But you can see up here, Station 31 covers this area. This area is characterized by being relatively spread out and, importantly, very disconnected. It's hard to go from one sort of pod of development to another. So it's actually difficult to access those different areas. And when your police or fire and response time is really important, that matters a lot. How many homes, residences, businesses can you get to in what amount of time? And if you're having to circle back and take lots of different routes and go extra distance, you can't get to as many as you can in the more compact station number 2. And what you find is that there are some pretty stark differences. Station number 2, well, let's start over here, actually. This shows you the households that each of those fire stations can cover. So you're looking at about 25,000 households if those households are grouped together well, and if you can get between them with a fairly connected transportation system, versus something just over, say, 6,000, 7,000 households. So a big difference. Same fire station in terms of the equipment and the people power and so forth, but not able to cover nearly as much stuff. And you can see also that that translates into a pretty significant difference in cost per person served. And that holds true for a lot of the linear things that we think about in terms of service, whether you're thinking about mail delivery, fire, police, et cetera. The more spread out it is and the more discontiguous it is, the tougher it is to serve and the more expensive it is. So when it comes to revenue, there are some basic lessons as well, and that's, as you saw, compact development is again the best deal. Low density suburban development generates a lot less per revenue, and you can increase your tax base a lot by basically bringing back areas that already exist. And we had some great examples, obviously, in Joe's presentation. This is one of my favorite examples, and I think it's just another way of illustrating some of the lessons that Joe was talking about. This is Arlington County. They basically have made a concerted effort to concentrate a lot of their development into about 10% of the county's land area. So remember, they didn't say, oh, all of Arlington has to be higher density and it all has to be mixed use and have commercial and all this stuff. They just said strategically, in places where it makes sense, this is what we're going to try to have happen. And so they put some effort into that, and that generates about 50% of their tax revenue. So they get half of their revenue just from this 10% of their land area. And that means that the other folks don't have to pay as much money either, because they're getting all this revenue from these areas, so those low density areas can exist and actually are helped a great deal by all the taxes that these areas pay. So it's about 49% of their commercial and 51% of their residential tax base. And you can see comparing to the other counties in Virginia that are around them, Arlington enjoys some of the lowest tax rates right here. Alexandria and Fairfax are next, and they also happen to be relatively compact. Fairfax City is a smaller area within Fairfax County that's relatively compact, and the more spread out you get, the higher the tax burden is getting. We also, as part of this study, we did some specific case studies, and one of them was here in Nashville, and we worked closely with Rick and looked at three developments: the Bradford Hills, Lenox Village, and the Gulf. I'm sorry, the Gulch, not the Gulf. So here's Bradford Hills. We could rename it if anyone's up for that. But here's Bradford Hills, pretty typical development out in a suburban area. One-story, single-family, spread around that land area. You've got Lenox Village, a sort of more new urban development, sort of new urban suburban in this case because of its location. And then the Gulch, downtown development that I think everyone is familiar with. And here's the project acreages. The Gulf actually uses fewer acres, something in the neighborhood of 75, it looks like, versus around 180 for the other two. You can see that there's a lot more housing units accommodated in the Gulch, and because of Joe's presentation, you know where this is going. The gross revenues from the Gulch versus the other places, despite having a lot less land area, are a lot higher. And then if you think back, of course, to the cost numbers, you know that that's going to be costing less. You're only having to serve, say, 75 acres rather than 180. And those 75 are going to be relatively well connected. And so it's going to be easier to serve those as well. And you're, in fact, probably reusing some of the infrastructure that would lead to or from that development, and that's helping you as well on the cost side. And here you have a comparison of the revenue and the cost. And you can see that for Bradford Hills, it's just about break even. Lenox Village does a little better. And the Gulch is a big winner when you put in the costs along with the revenues. So the net revenue, meaning revenues minus costs, it's about a wash, and you can see the Gulch is really cranking out cash, basically. Just to zoom in on Bradford Hills and Lenox, because the previous slide makes it tough to even read where those bars are, you're looking at about $20,000 in net revenue for Bradford Hills and $140,000 for Lenox Village. So the net revenue per housing unit is clearly much higher. It's just the simple math. The net revenue per acre also much higher, and again the lower area to serve. And so the bottom line, of course, is downtown and close-in neighborhoods are going to cost you less and yield a lot higher returns. More compact, even in suburban areas, more compact you're going to see some of the same dynamics, like we saw in Arlington County. If you can get those high revenue, low cost places, it can do a lot to offset the costs that come from other places, because we want a variety of housing types and a variety of community types, because people want different stuff, but you want to make sure you have something to generate the cash. And this makes all of that financial situation work. And this becomes more and more important if you're a land-constrained place. You have to start to really think about minimizing your costs and maximizing the revenues that you have within your jurisdictions. And so the general takeaway from our study, which was basically a study of studies, what do all the studies around the country say when you look at them together? They basically say what an architect from Asheville says. 10 times the revenue can be generated on average per acre. You can save about 10% on services in terms of operations and maintenance. And then just to build the infrastructure to serve it, you can save about 38%. So as sort of general rules of thumb, those are the kind of order of magnitude savings you can expect. Those results are very consistent around the country and show up consistently when you do individual case studies of the same. So it comes down to really, and this is, not a rhetorical question for a lot of the communities that I'm talking to. It is a real life, today, fiscal crisis issue. What can we afford? How do we get more revenues? How do we reduce our costs? Can we avoid raising taxes? Is there any stomach to bring in more revenue? Can we do what some of the places are doing, which is start to answer what is an increasing market demand for this kind of community and use that as a way to generate cash for our jurisdiction as a whole. And I will leave it with that, and thank you for your time.